I'm Adam Walker, a biometrics consultant, and this is the Pharma Prescribed podcast, where leaders, innovators, and hidden voices in healthcare open up. No sound bites, no spin, just raw insight, one prescription at a time. In an industry driven by data, protocols, and pressure, we rarely pause to ask the human questions. What drives us? What breaks us? And what truths live behind the titles we wear? Adam Walker is a pharmaceutical quality leader, qualified person, and innovation specialist with extensive experience in GMP manufacturing, aseptic processing, and medicine supply within the NHS and the wider pharmaceutical sector. He's head of development and innovation at the Northeast and North Cumbria Medicines Manufacturing Centre, where he leads projects focused on building the new generation of NHS pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. Alongside his NHS role, Adam is co-founder of Help Me GMP, a widely followed educational platform delivering free, practical, good manufacturing practice training and industry insights to pharmaceutical professionals worldwide. He's also involved in emerging technology initiatives exploring blockchain-enabled medicines and supply chain transparency. Adam is passionate about improving patient safety, strengthening medicine resilience, and making complex pharmaceutical topics accessible to the next generation of industry professionals. Adam, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Pharma Prescribed today. For those of our audience who are not familiar with you, who are you and what is the mission you're on?
Hi, Adam. Thank you very much for inviting me along. It's great to meet a fellow Adam Walker. So yeah, as you mentioned, I'm an NHS pharmacist by trade, qualified all the way back in 2003, which seems like an absolute age ago, and very quickly realized that clinical pharmacy really wasn't the right fit for me. I think deep down, I probably knew that going through university. And during a summer placement in my last year of university, I went to work at a small specials manufacturing facility called the Specials Lab, based just over the River Tyne from where I grew up. That was really my first introduction into what I would refer to as technical services, the pharma manufacturing side of things. It was a very young company at the time. It had been founded by Fiona Cruikshank and Brian Doherty. And I was one of the first, I suppose, 5 or 6 members of staff to work there. And even though it was just a summer placement, I really felt welcomed into the organization, learned the basics of good manufacturing practice, was actually involved in the manufacture of some of the specials that were made there, and realized that actually that was the right fit for me. That really was my calling. So after I finished my university degree, did my foundation training, as all pharmacists have to do, and passed my pre-reg exam. So I did my foundation training at Freeman Hospital in Newcastle. And during that year, I was more drawn towards technical services. And this is back in the days where most hospitals had an aseptic facility that would prepare compounded parenteral nutrition or chemotherapy doses. Some of them had some non-sterile manufacturing facilities and overlabeling, things like that. But it was probably the order of GMP that struck a chord with me, as opposed to what I viewed as the disorder of organic systems like patients. I recognized that the best way that I could help patients was actually probably by staying a bit further away from them in the clean rooms, preparing those critical medicines. So that was really what set me on my path into technical services from a pharmacist background. After that, I moved, as most young graduates do. I got the traveling bug. So I went to earn a bit of cash and worked in community pharmacy for a while, traveled around Australia and Samoa and Singapore and all of those great places. But when I came back, I went straight back into technical services, back into Newcastle Hospital Trust again, which Freeman Hospital was part of that group. Again, back into the aseptic facility. At that stage, the Newcastle hospitals had built one of the larger pharmacy manufacturing facilities, which is still operating today, a place called Newcastle Specials, which runs out of a facility at the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle upon Tyne. and they manufacture a range of different products. That was great exposure for me to see non-sterile manufacture, terminally sterilized manufacture, aseptic manufacture, and aseptic preparation and dispensing. It was a great opportunity to see a lot of different methods of manufacture and getting a lot of exposure to more GMP.
Thank you for explaining that, Adam. And just for those of our audience who are not familiar with specials, would you mind just explaining what the difference is between a special and perhaps an over-the-counter or a non-special?
Yeah, absolutely. So the term special comes from a special clinical need. So where a patient may have a particular condition or requirement that is not fulfilled by a marketed medicine, so a medicine with a full product license or market authorization. And this is UK only legislation. This does not apply to the rest of Europe. The UK has this specials license, and that basically means that the facilities that have this specials license are authorized to manufacture and put onto the market unlicensed medicines, but they're manufactured in the licensed premises. So in that regard, full GMP applies, but obviously you don't have that regulatory oversight that you get with a fully marketed product. So in terms of risk management, to operate under a specials license, you actually need to be really focused on quality risk management and the impact on the patient for any that you tend to manage. And obviously the products tend to have very short shelf life. We're talking about really small batches, quite often batch size of 1. So that limits your ability to, for example, sterility test the product before it's released and things like that. So it's a really interesting field, and it's much more aligned, much closer to another type of preparation, which is widely used throughout the NHS, and that is Section 10 exemption. This is where preparation of medicines is carried out under the supervision of a pharmacist. And this is where those small aseptic units that operate in a lot of hospitals around the country, that is the kind of regulatory landscape that they operate in. So you've got 3 broad areas. We've got Section 10 exemption at one end of the scale, and that might be the preparation of individual doses of chemotherapy, but importantly, those are prepared from licensed starting materials. So you get a vial of, for example, epirubicin from a commercial manufacturer, already sterile, QP certified, quality guaranteed, and you would withdraw the correct dose for the patient in controlled environments, often isolators. You would withdraw that dose and label it. Quality checks are performed by an accountable pharmacist or an authorized product approver or an authorized pharmacist, and those are released to the ward. But they have a limit of an 8-day maximum shelf life, normally need to be stored in a fridge, all those sort of things. At the other end of the scale, you've got fully licensed products manufactured by Accord, GSK, Eli Lilly, the big pharma. And that's large scale manufacture, more often than not, and full QP certification, market and authorization with the MHRA, patient information leaflets in the packs, all of that sort of stuff. And in the middle, that's where specials lives. So it's a gap between those two extremes.
That's a really nice way of explaining that. Thank you, Adam. And I think when you're describing that, it's very interesting also to hear not just the enthusiasm with which you describe that, but clearly the difference and the effort that goes into doing those one-offs and those specials, as opposed to prescribing straight out of pre-ordered packs, pre-prescribed, and all of those things. So is it about variation for you? What is it about the opportunity that's different than in the community pharmacy?
So I have spent some time in community pharmacies as well, and that was a very entertaining period for me, very exciting, but it wasn't where my passion was. And the reason I enjoy doing what I do, and in the majority of my time is spent in specials licensed facilities, it's because I feel I can have the biggest impact on patients. Now, In your introduction, you mentioned that my permanent role as Head of Development and Innovation for the Northeast North Cumbria Medicines Manufacturing Centre. This is a brand new facility that we're currently in the process of building. We should go live in early 2027. And this is a real step change for the NHS in the way these specials or these ready-to-administer products are prepared. So the Northeast North Cumbria site is one of 4 aseptic pathfinder hubs nationally. And this really came out of a drive to change the way that NHS approaches medicines preparation. I've said a few times that a lot of hospitals have these small aseptic facilities within them. And we're finding more and more that as these facilities get a little bit older, finding the capital to keep them up to the required standard is getting harder and harder, whilst at the same time the standards themselves require more and more. There was a new revision to Annex 1 of the GMP guide, which is manufacture of sterile medicines. It went from something of the order of 16 or 17 pages long to, what is it? Testing myself now, an awful lot more than that, 80 or it might be closer to 100 pages. And whilst it wasn't an enormous change in the requirements of those standards, what it did was add an awful lot more detail into how you need to comply with them. These standards apply to all areas where medicines are manufactured or prepared. I mentioned earlier on a Section 10 exemption, and that is an exemption to the requirement to hold a manufacturing license. It is not an exemption to good manufacturing practice. And these units need to comply to good manufacturing practice in order to protect patient safety. We're manufacturing critical medicines in these areas quite often for very poorly immunocompromised patients. And the risks, because we don't have any sort of back-end testing of those products, because they've got very short shelf life. A sterility test takes between 7 and 14 days to get a result back, whereas the product may have a 48-hour expiry. So you simply don't have time to test all of these products. So the burden comes down to assurance of the process rather than any quality control testing downstream. So these facilities, a lot of them are 15 years old or so and are requiring significant investment to bring them up to standard. Also, those standards have progressed as well, and the standard that you need to reach is no longer bringing it back to where it was, it's actually bringing it an awful lot higher than that. So as a result of that, NHS England made available a sum of money to invest in a number of pathfinder sites to create a hub and spoke model for aseptic manufacture within the NHS. The idea of that is that we will manufacture medium-sized batches, large batches for the NHS, but medium-sized batches of chemotherapy, intravenous antibiotics. Some sites are doing parenteral nutrition to reduce the burden on these smaller units that are distributed throughout the existing NHS estate, and allow them to focus on the stuff that you really have to prepare immediately before use or just the day before. The sites like the one that we're building just up in Seaton Delaval in Northumberland is designed to do those large batches. So we'll be doing batches of around 50 units at a time. And it'll be a number of different anti-cancer treatments, both small molecule and monoclonal antibody. There'll be a number of antibiotics there. The chemotherapy is obviously there to treat cancer patients, and we're going to be treating patients from the Scottish borders all the way down to South Tees and all the way across to Whitehaven in the west. So it's a really big geography that we've got to cover. We're looking to prepare approximately 150,000 doses a year. So that's a lot of chemotherapy. For our antibiotics, the focus is really about reducing the burden on nursing teams within hospitals, where they may be required to prepare these sterile doses of intravenous products in a treatment room on a ward, rather than spend 12, 15 minutes a dose doing that, that's 12 or 15 minutes per dose that they could spend looking after patients. And we're looking to manufacture up to 750,000 doses a year of these antibiotics.
You sound like you're going to be very busy in the coming years, Adam. It's an interesting lens with which you provide this regional experience that is effectively providing capability that doesn't currently exist at the moment. That can only be good news for patients, I'm imagining. And it particularly sounds to me like it's a more efficient means of getting drugs into the patients when they're needed at the point of care. What do you think the likely impact is going to be for patients? We've been talking over the last few years about health span versus lifespan, namely how long people live and what the quality of their life years are. Where do you sit around that in particular with this key initiative from the NHS?
Absolutely. So for patients, let's think about the antibiotics. Initially, when a patient presents A&E with symptoms of suspected sepsis, the triggers a target, I believe the target is still there, of 1 hour from door to needle. If the patient suspected a sepsis, you want IV antibiotics into their vein within an hour of them walking through the door. If you have to spend 12 to 15 minutes making that dose in that very busy A&E environment, that's not necessarily the best use of nursing time, when they could just simply go to a fridge, grab a ready-made bag, quality is assured, hang it up, give it to the patient, and away we go. So you can see how that patient experience, albeit it would undoubtedly still be relatively traumatic if that is how a patient is presenting. But these are the patients that are presenting to A&E department. Another one of the products that we're going to be manufacturing is furosemide, which is often used for people who are presenting with a lot of fluid on the lungs, often very distressed and struggling to breathe. So again, the ability to just grab a ready-made product and administer it to a patient rapidly is going to really help that patient journey. But the secondary benefit of that is that the nurses simply have more time to care for patients. Nurses, I wouldn't have thought, enter nursing to prepare medicines in a treatment room. They enter nursing so they can nurse patients. I've gone into pharmaceutical manufacturing because I like to make product. Or if that was a job on a ward, I would have been doing it there. But I think we need to play to the strengths of the different professionals that we have within the NHS and make sure we can utilize their time best. And that's exactly what the ready-to-administer antibiotics are designed to do, to release that time to patient care. But for me, the thing that really drives my passion within the NHS is making sure that patients have access to the chemotherapy that they need when they need it. I've run aseptic facilities in Newcastle and in Northumbria, where we do treat a lot of cancer patients. The real push for me came from a more personal experience. My mum was diagnosed during my pre-registration year, my foundation training year, with grade 4 bowel cancer. Now, that is an awful diagnosis to receive. She had extensive surgery. It was after the surgery that we established that actually it was metastatic disease with secondary cancers in her liver, lung, bone, peritoneum, all over the place. Really awful diagnosis. So the outlook didn't look great. She went through chemotherapy following her treatment, and she enrolled on the FOLFOX study, which was fluorouracil oxaliplatin, all the way back in 2003. We were hoping it might give her some symptomatic relief. We were hoping it might give her an extra couple of months and we might be able to do something with that time. She had an absolutely remarkable response to that chemotherapy. Practically unheard of for such an advanced disease. Cancer being the pig of a disease that it is, it does occasionally come back and bite you. But my mum had 3 or 4 rounds of chemotherapy, different regimes as things progressed. But because of that, she got an extra 9 years. She was at my wedding.
Wow.
She met my first son. That is only because of the fantastic surgeons that the NHS has and the chemotherapy. So you asked me before we started, what is my why? That's my why. Making sure that people get the chemotherapy they need, making sure people get the time to make those memories is why I get up in the morning.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredibly moving when I hear that, Adam. And every single person that comes on this podcast has a why. And I'm so sorry for your loss. On the flip side of that, you are doing wonderful work with great intention, and that must give you such joy to know that you are making a difference to other people's lives. More importantly, many people that come onto this podcast talk about an event or a moment that changed them. Clearly, that was the thing for you. As I say, we've all had those experiences, and many people will continue to have them.
Yeah.
In the context of your career, if you don't mind me asking, you're clearly in a very senior role these days, and that motivation has taken you forward, and you've climbed, and you are now in a significant position of authority. Along the way, were there any mentors, or was there anyone out there that helped you with that path?
Yeah, there's been a few along the way. I mentioned Fiona Cruikshank and Brian Doherty, who really shone a light on this kind of path as an option for pharmacists. That really helped me understand the route I wanted to go down. And after I'd been at the Newcastle hospitals for a period of time, I actually left and went back to that organization. It was a sister company to the one I'd originally worked at, but it was a spin out called SCM Pharma, which was a CDMO, again, based just over the road from my mum and dad at the time. That's where I really got interested in novel products. So the tagline, the company unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, but the tagline for that company was novel, difficult, and dangerous. So they used to manufacture all sorts of weird products. There was an intravenous aerosol, if you can believe it. There was a needleless injection system. And there was an ampoule filler, sterile ampoule filler for a non-aqueous flammable product. That was an interesting one. So I learned a lot in that organization about larger scale manufacture. I learned a lot about commercialization of products. They would bring a product in, take it through trial to commercialization. So that's where I learned how to operate within that space, and actually how to work with commercial clients as a CDMO. And that's been really helpful in trying to bring some of that. Now I'm back in the NHS, trying to bring some of that knowledge and learning back, because some of those things were done really well. Some of those things I believe the NHS does better, but actually there's probably a sweet spot between how things are done in a CDMO world and how things are done in the NHS. When you're in the NHS, you have a real focus on patients because they feel much closer to them. Quite often these facilities are in hospitals. The one I'm working at now isn't, because it's so much larger. There's just simply not enough space on a hospital site. But yeah, sorry, you asked me about mentors, and I've gone down a complete rabbit hole there. So yeah, Fee and Brian certainly set the ball in motion. At Newcastle, there's probably 2 or 3 real key people there who helped shape my career. And that is Alison Beanie, who is infamous. Maybe that's the wrong word, but she quite literally wrote the book on aseptic standards within the NHS. She edited Quality Assurance for Aseptic Preparation Services, or the QAPS Guide, commonly known as the Yellow Guide. She edited edition 5 of that, which has been the standard for NHS aseptic facilities for possibly close to 2 decades now. There is a new set of standards coming out that'll be going out for consultation this summer. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the group who were developing the new standard. So having worked with Alison at the RVI and then moving through to helping write the next version of her standards is a real career highlight. Also at the RVI is Anne Black. So Anne is a regional quality assurance specialist pharmacist, has a real focus on ATMP manufacture and ATMP deployment within the NHS, wrote the guidance with a number of other people for organizational readiness for bringing these disruptive technologies into hospital environments. When we're bringing in cryopreserved cell-based products, CAR T therapies, all those sort of things. So I worked very closely with Anne for a number of years at the RVI, and she really helped me see the potential for advanced therapies. And now I'm an operating QP. I'm involved with the certification of advanced therapies in clinical trials at a number of sites, both in Newcastle and Scotland. Finally, at Newcastle, Dave Caulfield, who is a good friend of mine and was a good friend of mine since our foundation year, which we actually did together at the Freeman Hospital. Dave was head of quality at Newcastle and my QP sponsor as well. So Dave really helped me get to where I am in terms of my professional QP status right now. And I suppose one final person I couldn't not mention is a very close friend and business partner now, a guy called Kyle Wynn. Kyle, I first met back in probably 2005. He was a newly qualified pharmacy technician, locum pharmacy technician, and turned up to the aseptic unit at the Royal Victoria Infirmary with very sculpted, highlighted blonde hair, diamond earrings in both ears, a huge kipper tie, very stylish young man. Here's bald Adam, who opens the change room door wearing clean room scrubs. And I took one look at him and said, I take all that rubbish off now, can't you? But I worked together with Kyle at the RVI for a number of years. I then joined Kyle at the Aseptic facility in Northumbria, which is based up in Ashington, which was an unlicensed facility. And Kyle and I worked together to bring that facility to license. We obtained the first specials license for Northumbria there. We increased production of a ready-to-administer antibiotic from 10,000 units a year all the way up to 40,000 units a year. And after I left there, Kyle pushed that even further up to 100,000 units a year. And Kyle is now head of production at the Northeast North Cumbria Medicines Manufacturing Centre, where I'm head of development and innovation. But Kyle and I have had a career that is dotted in and out for a lot of years. And now we have partnered to launch something you mentioned in your intro, the Help Me GMP YouTube channel. We now have a website as well, www.whatisgmp.com. The mission for us with these kind of platforms is to basically create access to good quality GMP information, training in an accessible, easy to learn format that will help the next generation enter the GMP space. The organization I work for, we're about to go into a phase of recruitment. Once the facility's built, we'll need to grow the workforce. There's about 30 people in the organization at the moment, and that'll need to grow substantially all the way up to 150. A lot of those roles will be those entry-level roles where you first get to understand GMP. And going into an interview for those type of roles, I think would be really daunting if you're fresh out of school, fresh out of university, never worked in a GMP environment before, haven't got a clue what a change control is, or a deviation, or understand anything about micro. That's going to be quite difficult. The whole purpose of the channel and the platform is to create a library of information that's easily accessible. It's on YouTube, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on Spotify, that allows people to access it from wherever they are and absorb the information in a way that is much more aligned to what I would call the TikTok generation.
It's a great point, Adam. And it's a full circle, really, isn't it? Because mentors mentored you, and you're doing that significant thing in giving back to the next generation. And that's entirely uplifting and heartwarming, because it's a principle that follows with me as well. And with many of the guests I've had on the podcast, we've often found that people have been mentored or people have pushed open doors for others. And what this is about is ease of access, really, isn't it? What you're describing is that it's how do you find out these things? Of course, there are plenty of tools out there now that don't necessarily just come in a leather-bound book anymore. But the fact is that, like you said, the next generation access their information and get educated very differently to the manner in which we learned our trades. So I think it's a really wonderful way of just tying that full circle experience. So thank you for elaborating on that. I did actually have a look before the recording of the website, and I listened to a couple of things on Spotify. I was hoping to hear your voice, but what I heard was some American people. So I don't know whether that was deliberate or if there was a reason for that, but tell me more, maybe.
Content creation, as I said, this is a hobby. We are by no means professionals, as you can quite obviously tell just by the way I'm coming across during this conversation. I have done voiceovers for some, not all. Kyle's done some voiceovers for some. We use some generative AI to voice some. We'll obviously write the scripts. Everything is curated. There's a lot of stuff out there at the moment where people will just put a prompt into whatever the generative platforms are and just post whatever it is. That's not the way we operate. We have a kind of GMP approach to the content that we manufacture. Kyle is production. He will create the scripts, he will create the content, and I will do the QA. So I'll listen to it, I'll edit it, we'll tweak stuff, we'll go back. It's not a very fast process, and it does take us a little while to get content out there. Having said that, I think we're probably approaching about 150 videos on YouTube. I think we're well over 1,700 subscribers, which isn't a lot in the Mr. Beast world, but for a really niche kind of subject, I think we're doing okay. One thing that people do think is that, oh, you've got a YouTube channel, you must be making money from it. I'll go on the record and say you do not make money off YouTube. We don't get paid at all. And the amount of money that you got to spend on kit is crazy. So, yeah, it's a hobby. And expensive.
It's definitely a hobby. It's a time sink. I would say exactly the same, by the way. Having a YouTube channel and all the other audio channels that Pharma Prescribe goes out on, exactly to your point. It's a niche market, but it's our niche market. I hope perhaps this conversation will make its way onto the Help Me GMP hub.
100%.
Is there anything we haven't talked about today, Adam, that perhaps you would have liked to have touched upon before we go on to the quickfire round?
No, I don't think so. I am involved with a number of different projects, but I think we've probably touched on the ones that people are most interested in hearing about right now.
Thank you. It's been fascinating to listen to your expertise. What I should have said probably earlier was just the fact that good manufacturing practice and good clinical practice overlap so inherently. GCP is the thing that I follow, GMP is the thing that you follow, but I have worked in many organizations where GMP has been front and center, particularly around rare disease, one-off drugs, and compassionate use drugs. So when I saw your profile, that's what really spoke to me as well, particularly. But it's been a fascinating insight. And at this point, I always like to conclude with a quick fire round, Adam. So I'm wondering, what is the one piece of advice you would give to your younger self?
Don't be afraid to open your mouth. I was very shy as a kid and still struggle with that. Although I think I'm old enough now to realize that it really doesn't matter what other people think. If you've got something that you're passionate about and you want to say, just stand up and say it.
Wholeheartedly agree with that one. What are the top 3 qualities you value most when building a team?
Honesty, as cliche as that is, but especially as a QP, if you're talking to production or QC colleagues when inevitably things go wrong sometimes, right? Having the confidence that you are getting the full answer and nothing is being hidden because there's a perception that it's not what you want to hear. That's absolutely crucial. Two more. Just being able to get on with somebody, being able to talk. It's just so important. Being able to talk and without fear of retribution, and being able to relax around people, I think is really important. So working with people that you enjoy spending time with, I think really helps the team. Certainly Kyle and I work very well together, and that wouldn't be the case if we weren't really good mates. And dare to dream. When I'm auditing somewhere, when we're facing a problem, and the question comes to, why do we do it like that? I've always done it like that. Oh, that drives me mad. So keep pushing, keep moving forward. Don't stand still. Don't rest on your laurels. The regulations change all the time. There's always a better way to do something. So try and find it.
I wholeheartedly agree with that one, Adam. And actually, having been at a conference this week, I heard someone say the thing that we should do is think bolder. As a nation, the UK is quite limiting in our capabilities as far as we're very polite. We don't like to think too big. We just think big enough. What this guy was saying was, you need to think over and above and beyond that. Go bold. Go bold or go home. And I think that's what you're saying there. And what is your favorite thing outside of work?
I ride a motorbike. I like engines, cars, things that make noise, stuff like that. I like engineering, basically. I love engineering. I love F1. I love my motorbike. Probably enjoy working on my motorbike more than riding it, although I do enjoy both. But those are the things that I really enjoy doing. That and the YouTube stuff. That's not work. That is for fun. That's a real passion as well. If it's nice weather outside, I'll get out on the bike. If it's raining, probably some video editing.
That's wonderful. And finally, Adam, what is your number one golden rule in life and in business?
That's a great question. I wish I had these up front. Just be willing to accept that you don't get things right every time. If you constantly punish yourself for getting things wrong, you'll be too afraid to try something different. So try something new and don't be afraid to fail. I think that's the important thing. And if you do fail, use it as a lesson. It's not a bad thing. Everyone messes stuff up sometimes, but we can't all be perfect.
Thank you, Adam. That's very helpful. And I've said it a few times and I'll say it again. Failure is data acquisition, is it not? I would say that as a data guy, right?
100%.
We've had a wonderful conversation today, Adam. It's been a delight to hear how you got into this industry, how those mentors along the way, not least of all, that rock and roll pharmacist, Carl, who I have to give a shout out to, helped you along the way and maintained that friendship and working relationship with you. And I'm wondering, for anyone who's listening to us who wants to get in contact with you and wants to continue the conversation, what's the best way to make contact with you, Adam?
So LinkedIn's probably the best place to go if it's something career-wise. Alternatively, there's the Help Me GMP YouTube channel. So if there's anything that you need in terms of GMP, feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Adam. And the other thing, of course, is we look quite different. So our profile shots on our LinkedIn profiles should at least point you down the GMP route or the GCP route. It's been an absolute delight to welcome you onto the podcast today, Adam. You've made me smile and you've enlightened my day in equal measure. I hope to continue the conversation with you. And once again, thanks for taking the time today.
Great stuff. Thank you, Adam. Really appreciate it.